Good morrow to you all. You have fallen on bad times.
Brought to you by the Royal Holloway Shakespeare Society.
You join me, Theo Dudridge.
And me, Lynn Biles, as we bear some bardy truths. Hello and welcome to this episode of Bar Times. I am again your host Lynn, and in light of the fact that February is Queer History Month, this episode is going to focus on queerness within Shakespeare's plays. And to discuss this, I've got the lovely Cate with me.
Hello.
Cate, it's lovely to have you on. One of my dearest, queerest friends.
Yes.
I am so excited for this episode. So the first place that I'd kind of like to talk about queerness in Shakespeare is how we would go about reading queerness within Shakespeare's plays in the 21st century.
Yeah. For me, as a queer woman,
We probably should have stated that at the beginning. I identify as she, they, and queer. You identify as
she, they, and queer bisexual person.
Wonderful. But yes, reading queerness.
For me, Shakespeare's always been inherently queer. You see it from the context of which the plays were created in and performed in. Only men were allowed to perform because it was uncouth for women to. It was bad. So there's always that idea of queerness within Shakespeare, especially within the original adaptations. But there's also that idea of gender performance and how them dressing up as women adds a new level of queerness on, because it's, as the audience, oh, these men are men. Oh, but they're dressed up as women. Yeah. It's kind of gender bending and interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's something that gets lost quite often nowadays. I mean, because obviously we have more gender equality on stage.
Yeah.
Having women play women gives it obviously more agency than it would have done in the context of the original performances. But that kind of aspect of gender performance is something that is so integral to the text, and when you do look at the text itself, you can kind of see how women are presented in almost, well, now what we would see in sort of a pantomime way. It still resonates nowadays with women. I mean, we're both actresses, we've both been on stage.
I wouldn't call myself that.
I don't know. You're very talented.
Oh, thank you.
You're one of the
Sarah,
funniest... Oh, stop it, you. You're one of the funniest people in Taming.
Thank
A
you.
joy to work with, a wonder to have on stage. But yeah, playing female characters with Shakespeare, it doesn't necessarily feel like you are pantomiming, does it? I mean, it feels oddly natural, and actually a lot of the undercurrents of these characters and their motivations still seems so relevant and present nowadays, which I think makes Shakespeare resonate with so many people. I mean, we'll get to this a little bit later, but I think that's a reason that Shakespeare does resonate with queer people especially.
Oh yeah, definitely. As a woman performing Shakespeare, and especially a queer woman, there is always that idea of queerness within characters, especially lead female characters like Cate.
Yes, I was going to say Cate's a big one.
Rosalind in As You Like It, or even Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah.
There is always that idea of queerness within these characters.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to relationships with men and their counterparts.
I think it's really interesting, the characters that you've mentioned before, because they all have elements of traditional masculinity in air quotes. Because obviously Cate can't be tamed. She's boisterous and terrible, and I love her dearly.
She's amazing.
She is. Rosalind spends half her time pretending to be a little boy and wooing her lover in a magical forest, which, nice. As one does. And then Beatrice, bless her, just hates men.
Yeah.
Just hates men.
She doesn't hate all men.
She resents the fact she likes men.
Yes. As any...
Yeah.
as any bisexual woman does. We're joking, of course.
You just... The choice between men and women.
Yeah. You choose women.
Yeah. Naturally as a woman.
I'm sorry, George.
Oh, our love goes out to George.
Our love goes out to George. I love him.
Bless him. But yeah, so it's interesting that all of these characters could be read as like implicitly queer. I remember being in the taming character workshop, and Supan was like saying, what do you think makes Cate react the way she reacts to Petruchio's advances? And I was like, well, being a queer person myself, that level of discomfort that comes from Cate and men, like not even just Petruchio, it's just any sort of suitor she fights off very viciously and gets this awful reputation of being the shrew-like character. And I think it's just the distance between her and men is she just doesn't engage, doesn't understand and or want those advances. And so the way that I sort of played Cate was very much as a closet case lesbian.
Yeah. It was similar with being Grumio.
Yes.
Grumia.
Grumia.
She is, of course...
I mean, Cate and Grumia are going to run off to a cottage.
In the sequel,
Taming 2. God, a tame slaying. That's a tame slaying where Max plays Cate and I play Petruchio in theatres soon.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. But yeah, Grumia and Cate running away and living in the woods together.
Yeah, but happening. For Grumia, where I really went for characterisation for Grumia is kind of the little sister, but also this kind of she's a queer woman and she wants to be equal to men.
Interesting, yeah, because you've already got that layer.
Not.
Yeah.
And there is already that queerness within the original text with Grumio and Petruchio anyway. That kind of underlying, Grumio obviously knows Petruchio's a bit fruity, which we love.
Needless to say,
yes. But there's always that kind of, the way they react to each other, they're always very physically close to one another. And it's not even with the abuse, it's just them just always having to be in contact with each other.
It feels very Janice from Mean Girls.
Yeah. And it's kind of, but yeah, I looked, when I was playing Grumia, kind of looked at it as if she wanted to be one of the lads.
Yeah, I see that, because obviously taking Grumia from Grumio, the originally male character, and then kind of, not so much queering it, but playing with the gender there.
Yeah, for me, Shakespeare's inherently queer.
Talking of which, Shakespeare himself. That old chestnut.
Oh.
Shakespeare himself, I mean, it's needless to say the man was a little bit fruity. Maybe, perhaps. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's lots of actual academic debate as to Shakespeare and sexuality. But you've got to be a certain type of man to be that obsessed with making penis jokes.
Well, yeah. Shakespeare, I always, at school, was taught Shakespeare was a straight man until I came to uni. And then someone went, Are you sure about that? Read these sonnets or actually look at kind of the context. There is always that kind of queerness that is alluded towards Shakespeare. I mean, it's almost like folklore of, he was a gay man or he was a queer man.
And I think no one can really say, because obviously we don't have Shakespeare's diary. We can't just flick through and find his fun gay escapades, because they're non-existent. But I mean, you can look at his relationship with the Earl of Southampton and see like that presentation of him as, potentially him as the fair youth in the sonnets. I mean, you don't go round writing 100 odd sonnets to a young lad if you're not at least somewhat interested or infatuated. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like, it's not even like a whole sexual thing, perhaps. It's like
it's the eroticism.
Well, not even that. It could just be desire, or like you can have. I mean, love comes in very many different forms, and I mean, you can have like sexual love, but you can also have romantic love. You can have platonic love. So I think queerness, obviously, it doesn't stick to binaries. It's on many different levels, and I think you can't really put Shakespeare in like a 21st century box or label. But there's a thing about Shakespeare. there's so many reasons his plays resonate with queer people, and I suppose that is something we can kind of go on to, is why does Shakespeare strike so many queer people? Because I know we've talked quite a bit in the past about what Shakespeare means to us as queer people.
Yeah, I mean, for me, not just as a queer person, I mean, Shakespeare as a young teenager, around 16, I read Hamlet.
Yep, so did I. I know where this is going.
And I understood it, but I also lost my dad at a young age.
Yeah.
And so I understood that anger of just not understanding yourself and being attracted to more than one gender or more than one person at a time.
Yeah, and it's that confusion that I think Shakespeare, I mean, obviously Shakespeare is known for that, like, complex exploration of emotions and the psyche in general. And I think Hamlet especially is one of those plays which really does play with that idea of, okay, this is the confused mind of a teenage, like, guy.
Yeah.
And I saw Hamlet for the first time when I was about 14, which is kind of when I was struggling with my own sexuality.
Yeah.
And I kind of then didn't really think about it much, and then picked it back up at A-level, and by then I was like, I'd already had like all of my main like gay linear experiences, and kind of felt quite comfortable with who I was, and then it kind of made sense. It was like, oh, okay, I kind of understand why Horatio acts the way Horatio acts, and I kind of understand the way Hamlet acts towards Ophelia, even though it's horrific.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he completely manipulates her in every way, shape and form.
Yeah.
But you can kind of get in his mind, because that's what Shakespeare wants you to do, and it's what he's showing you.
Well, yeah, when, not to, I'm just going to use an example. When I co-directed Hamlet last year, this time last year, I made it very much a kind of thing of showing that queerness and kind of showing that kind of breakdown of Hamlet's own identity within the monologues and the soliloquies. And I remember talking to the wonderful Lolly and the wonderful Tom, who played our Ophelia and our Hamlet, and talked to them about why Hamlet's reacting this way. And they just talk about Tom came up with it like saying, because he just doesn't understand himself, and he doesn't understand his attraction to certain people. And I thought that was really interesting, and I very much understood that, especially when reading it as a 16-year-old girl.
Gosh, yeah, no, it really is one of those plays that when you pick it up at that age, it's just there's a reason why it strikes you so like severely. I remember having like in my English class there were certain people that just we really got on with Hamlet, and we just really got it. Kind of going on from, I mean, we've talked a little bit about different plays, but in terms of queer plays, there's quite a lot, aren't there, that you could kind of read. I mean, you've got your basic Antonios. Rule of thumb, if there's an Antonio, probably a little bit fruity. I mean, I remember studying Merchant of Venice at GCSE. That Antonio is like, Bassanio, can you come and get me, even though you've just got married to your wife, because I've kind of accidentally got myself, I own a pound of flesh to a moneylender. Please don't let me die, Bassanio, my love. Yeah. And Bassanio's like, oh, damn it, I've got to go and fix my boyfriend. Sorry, wife.
Yeah. Yeah, there are loads of, I think...
So many examples.
My favourite play, Much Ado.
Of course.
Love it. Is, I like to think, the queerest play. There are many examples. So you've got also another queer play, which I think is queer. Not a lot of people do. Is Henry IV Part 1 and 2 and the journey of Hal and Poins.
Yeah.
It's very homoerotic, and it's very kind of...
Oh, Prince Hal.
Oh, Prince Hal. How do I love you, and like all that stuff.
A little chaos man.
You know, and...
Just let the poor man drink and be merry.
Well, yeah, exactly.
He didn't think he'd be king, but here we are.
There's always that kind of homoeroticism between the two of them. But going back to Much Ado, I mean, it's about two bisexuals falling in love.
By accident.
Because their friends force them to. Who doesn't love it?
No, it's one of those plays which is an absolute joy because the amount of distaste Beatrice and Benedict have for the opposite gender.
Well, yeah, their merry war.
Yeah, their merry war. It's just so much fun to see them both being so staunch on the fact that they think that their gender is the best, and then suddenly they're like, oh no, I quite like my enemy. Oh no, well, it's not even that. It's no, my enemy quite likes me. No,
I like them.
The bisexual panic has never been more captured rapturously than in Much Ado.
Yeah,
I suppose. Talking about gender in terms of gender bending, we've got my favourite gals who may not even be gals. You've got Viola and you've got Rosalind. Also Portia kind of and Imogen may also come under this zone, but kind of in terms of gender performance and really playing with romance, because I mean Portia is playing with the hierarchy and kind of law, and Imogen is a political exile. Yes. Yeah, I think.
Yes, because
might be barking up the wrong tree. It's been a long time since I've seen Cymbeline.
Of her stepmother and her son. Yeah. Cloten.
Yeah. Going back to gender, so Twelfth Night and As You Like It very much present this gender play within a romantic setting, which I think is really interesting. So you have obviously Rosalind is pretending to be Ganymede and flirting with her love, Orlando, and Orlando being oddly down for it. He's like, yeah, this random little boy has gone up to me and been like, hey, so pretend that I'm your love, Rosalind. And he's like, yeah, why not? Sounds fun.
Same with Orsino and Viola.
Orsino just at the end when it's like, you're not Cesario? You're a woman? And he's like, okay, I'm kind of down for it. It's like, he's been in your court. He's been in your court for months at this point. And you were just like, yeah, I would.
Which is fair.
It is fair, but there's got to be a level of attraction.
Yeah, there has got to be a level of attraction.
You can't work that closely with someone and then suddenly go, oh yeah, I'm kind of attracted to them. There's got to be something. You were attracted to their personality before you knew their gender. Yeah. So that's I find that really interesting.
Yeah. Also Midsummer, that's just the gayest, queerest play.
You could adapt that, and you can adapt...
In all of Shakespeare.
So you can adapt Midsummer in so many ways.
Did you ever watch the Bridge Theatre production where they swapped Titania fall in love with Bottom and made it Oberon fall in love with Bottom, and it was the one with Gwendolyn Christie in it. Hysterical, because they go to have their night together.
Yeah.
And the bed gets pushed around the stage.
Yeah, I've seen clips. Yeah, I know the one.
Beyonce's Love on Top plays. And I'm like...
And it makes sense, because it's with Bottom.
You know?
Oh, Jesus.
And as a director, as a wannabe professional director, I'm like, perfect. This is beautiful.
Park and Oberon anyway. They're on thin ice.
Oh yeah.
Fairy, anything supernatural. I think Merrick said this the other day. Anything supernatural in Shakespeare is kind of a little bit gay.
The witches?
The witches? You don't just go living with three random women. They're definitely, oh my god, I've never seen something more sapphic in my life.
Love it. Cottagecore witches in
Macbeth, but make it cottagecore.
Make it cottagecore.
Oh dear. Queerest characters. Any other characters we haven't really touched upon that could kind of come under the queer bracket? Petruchio, yes, but also the way that Max does Petruchio in the incredibly flamboyant. If you didn't see...
very much a bisexual man.
If you didn't see our version of Taming, you won't understand the flamboyant pose that Max does, but it is one of my favourite things to replicate whenever... If I have to play a toxic man ever in theatre, it's suddenly I'm in the action pose of Petruchio.
I sometimes catch myself doing it.
Yeah, it's fun,
Like
isn't it?
Like the limp hand.
It's the strong elbows
And the limp hands.
wrists and the like claw hands.
Like Spider-Man hands. Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I love Max. And he was fantastic as
he is such. I loved that spin on Petruchio though.
Yeah.
It really worked.
It really worked for the adaptation as well.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
Oh, King Lear, Edmund.
Lear, yeah.
He is very much the scorned. Is it him? He's not the son. He's the bastard.
Yeah. Mhm. You know what, Kate? You know what we've not mentioned at all once in your episode?
What?
Derek Jarman. We haven't talked about The Tempest. That's your whole dissertation. Oh dear.
Yes.
I was waiting for you to bring up Jarman.
Do you know what? When I'm not writing that dissertation, I forget everything about it.
Oh dear.
I'm just like, I just block it out because of the pain.
Not that Derek Jarman's version of The Tempest is painful.
No,
it's beautiful. It's a work of art.
It is a work of art. It's an avant-garde Brechtian queer adaptation of The Tempest, and it is superb. It was 1979, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
So please go and watch it. I urge you all to do your dissertations on it. I'm joking. Please don't. But yeah, no, The Tempest is. You got non-binary characters. You got Ariel, and you've got what's it? Caliban. Caliban's not really. It can be.
Caliban gives me asexual energy. He's just a kind rock man who just wants to be accepted for who he is, and everyone treats him poorly.
In Jarman's one though, he's not. He's more of a villain. In Jarman's, which I found an interesting kind of turn of like kind of characterization for Caliban. Yeah, he is more scheming, and I think he's more. I think
like a lot. It's odd because I'd almost put Caliban in the same area as like female characters. It's the same with me and like Shylock. It's obviously a minority. Caliban is a minority character. He is coded as a minority, whether that's race, ethnicity, like because you can't really tell, but it's like heavily racial.
Oh, like, very much.
Yeah. So it's kind of obviously. It's like Shylock. He's originally written in a way that he's supposed to be the villain, but at the end of it, you realise that hey, Caliban has basically been taken from his mother and been made to be this white man's slave. Yeah, and it's horrific. And I mean, I can't watch The Tempest without being like, Caliban deserves the rage that Caliban has.
Definitely. Definitely. That's a really important point. Yeah. The kind of racial issues within. I forgot queer character. Iago from Othello.
Oh, Iago, yeah.
Queer coded to the max. He's obsessed with Othello.
Yeah. So many villains that are obsessed. Edmund, yeah.
Iago.
How did we forget Mercutio and Benvolio?
We forgot Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Romeo.
Oh,
he's a bisexual.
In the same vein as Lucentio from Taming. I know that in A Sly Taming we had Lucentia as a lesbian anyway, but when I first read that, I pine, I perish line, I was like, some lesbian on Tinder said that to me at some point. Like, that's gotta have happened. That's such a, like, sapphic line, it hurts. Going back to the subject of grumia and gender in, our version of Taming, playing with gender and sexuality in Shakespeare plays is something that a lot of, like, dramaturgs and directors do often, actually. It seems to be something that becomes very, very common. I mean, you have a lot more gender-blind casting nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it in productions we've wanted to do, and just ideas of concepts of many different shows. But yeah, there is always that kind of you're able to with Shakespeare because it is so accessible to this queerness and this level, like it's almost underlying queerness in all of his plays that you are able to swap genders for. I don't think there are many characters you can't swap genders for.
No, I mean, it's going back to literally the very beginning of this podcast. Like, it is because of that foundation being men playing every role. It makes it so easy to flip it on its head, have women playing every role,
Exactly.
having anyone playing any role, and kind of having this almost, obviously gender can enhance performance. Like, a character's motives might change if you take it from male to female, or if you take away gender altogether, that completely then changes narratives also. And I think it's a really interesting subject to play around with, especially within different plays.
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved gender swapped versions of the comedies.
Yeah, I think that
because it just works so well.
Yeah, gender swapping with the comedies is
so well.
Yeah, one of those things where it works hand in hand because of how light-hearted a lot of the comedies are.
Yeah, and even with some of the tragedies. I mean, Maxine Peake, Manchester, everyman version of Hamlet is superb.
I mean, the Bernhard Hamlet, like women playing Hamlet, goes back all the way to the 19th century.
Yeah,
like it's been something that's happened for so long that it's almost, some critics think it's almost cliche at this point to have a woman playing Hamlet, but the agency that gives a woman on stage, it's just unbridled, because women have so much pain, so much anger, so much anguish, and so much pain within them naturally, that I think the tragedies does give them a voice to air it almost.
Oh, definitely. And I think that's really important. I mean, they've done female versions of King Lear.
Yeah.
And
they did all-female, I mean,
Prison's
it's a
trilogy.
It is a comedy, but an all-female version of Taming. They did at the RSC a couple of years ago.
They've done gender swap versions of the history plays.
A woman as Henry V.
I think Shakespeare has that accessibility and versatility to make those gender swapped kind of productions work, because you
hardly have to do anything to change the gender, and the motives just go with it. Like, you don't, textually, your gender swapping is just supported near enough with any character. You can go, oh, well then this now makes sense why they did this, even if it worked before you gender swapped them. It still works, but sometimes it works better.
Well, yeah, and that's what I love about plays like Much Ado. If you gender swap both Beatrice and Benedick, and Beatrice becomes the male figure, the male presenting character, actor, performs, you have that untrust of men that I think a lot of gay men have, especially of straight men have. And I think that's it adds another really interesting layer onto sexuality and gender, especially within a modern society.
Oh, definitely. No, I couldn't agree more.
The same with Henry V. If Henry's...
Good old Hal making a return. Good old
Hal. If they're... Or Richard III. If they're played by a woman... completely changes the motive of power, and almost makes it a thing of they've turned this way because of the lack of agency they've had.
Yeah,
it's interesting, but it still works. I mean, you wouldn't be able to change characters' genders so liberally in modern texts, like, I don't know, Pinter, like plays like Betrayal, because it's very much centered around that very stagnant idea of gender and two men and one woman.
Yeah.
Samuel Beckett or
contemporary ideas about gender, especially with like feminism becoming so obviously wonderfully prominent in this day and age. You see a lot more binary writings about gender, and I think Shakespeare comes from a time where obviously people weren't, the idea of gender was so fixed, and like obviously they were playing with gender, you had men playing women and that was fine, but women had a place in society which women have kind of transcended, meaning that these roles and characters which were written about women, not for women, they kind of have that ability to be transient, whereas
Yes.
nowadays gender is like, women does this, that is women, men are like this, oh, they don't like each other, or oh, they're
it's
in love.
Almost non-binary in a way, and not taking away from anyone's
experience or
label. Anyone can play any of these characters. Doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman or non-binary.
It's applicable.
It's applicable to anyone.
It's the emotion underneath. It's the emotion. It's the motivation. It's the psyche. It's just a human as a person rather than just an archetypal.
Definitely. Everything is stripped away, and it's very human. And I think that's what makes Shakespeare great, and that's what makes Shakespeare queer. Is that transient idea of gender and that sexuality, even though it's important and even though is applicable, it isn't the most important thing.
Yeah.
It's
just another thing
it's
another
adds
layer
to it, which you don't see in many modern or contemporary kind of plays. Yeah. I mean, you could say the same thing about Marlowe and Edward II.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh,
that's kind of with all of those, with all Shakespeare and his
even
peers.
Marlowe though, like with Edward II, it's so integral to have that like masculine love. Like you can have two women playing Edward and Gaveston and Edward and Spencer, but still that. It almost relies on that relationship between men, and then you have Isabella, the scorned wife, who's just angry and wants revenge. Marlowe is almost a very gendered playwright, whereas I think Shakespeare is a lot more fluid.
Yeah, I see that. I also think for some of Marlowe's plays, it's very similar to Shakespeare.
Yeah.
But I think, as you said, Shakespeare is very fluid in most things.
Yeah, and I mean, as directors, dramaturgs nowadays, you have so much liberty with Shakespeare because, I mean, out of every playwright that's ever been, Shakespeare is the most performed and the most well known. We know the stories, we know the concepts, and everyone wants to do something new. Everyone wants to remake the wheel.
Yeah. And
I think that allows for directors and dramaturgs to be more playful and take take the written words and just run. It's like poetry. Well, I mean, it is. A lot of it is poetry. But it's like interpreting a poem. It's like taking the lines you're given and just running with an idea.
That's what I love, and that's what I love about Shakespeare.
Exactly, me too. I hardly ever talk about Shakespeare and language, and that being the reason I love it, and the versatility. But no, it's such an integral part of Shakespeare, and breaking this down is like gives you a really good grasp on why Shakespeare works so well still.
Yeah, and especially in regards to queerness. You know, there are lines within the plays that are applicable to both genders.
Yeah.
No matter who's saying them. You have with, I'm trying to think of a line, you have with Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophies. It's very much, you know, anyone can play it, and it's different if a woman says it to a man, or if a woman says it to another woman, or a man says it to another man. But it still has that kind of overarching broadness.
I suppose what we can take from this is that the heteronormativity that we go into often when we approach a text is not necessarily as fixed as we suppose it is, and sometimes these elements of queerness really do add to a text, especially when you have a concept behind you that supports it. And I think it's really interesting to see how throughout time elements of gender and sexuality have been presented and used to convey these narratives, which at their core are just human.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for me anyway, as a queer woman, plays and art and TV and film will, but when queerness is there underlying and it's, you know, present, those stories are always, for me anyway, the most human. And I think that's the same with Shakespeare. Some of you might disagree, but this is coming from, you know,
I suppose it allows you to
film
question
student.
yourself.
Definitely.
And it reaches out to a reader. You don't necessarily, a reader or an audience member, you don't necessarily have to be a queer person to resonate with Shakespeare. Because I think Shakespeare resonates with everyone. There is a character you will find yourself drawn to in any Shakespeare play. You will be able to find one character. I mean, he's got quite a few characters. Anyone that's worked as a dramaturg on any bid team knows how many characters Shakespeare's got. But yeah, there's always someone with a motivation or a conflict, internal or external, that you will relate to. And I think that is why we just love Shakespeare.
Very true.
And I think thus naturally concludes this wonderful episode before Queer History Month. I'd like to say a wonderful thank you to Cate for being here and being my right-hand man as always.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, it's been an absolute
Very
pleasure.
nice to talk queerness with you, my love.
On a similar note, if you've been inspired to write a new adaptation potentially about queerness or any other aspect of Shakespeare you'd like to explore, do keep an eye out on our social medias, because on the 13th of Feb we have submissions for our really exciting new opportunity, Fresh Folio, where you get a chance to rewrite Shakespeare or perform Shakespeare in a different way, or kind of just explore and play around with the ideas and concepts Shakespeare has originally laid out. So do get involved with that and come back to our social medias to see when things are happening. We'd love to see you and love to have you on the team. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Bard Times. I've been your host Lynn, and in the words of the Bard, I'd much rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swears he loves me.